The children in Quihua's family truly have a hard life. If they're not eating grass, they're gnawing on pumpkins. Today, Quihua went out to do some odd jobs at the landlord's house, leaving only the children and Tiju at home. In Nepal, men almost never do housework, but today Tiju had to break this tradition. To take care of the few hungry children at home, he could only cook a big pot of nettle leaves as the main dish for the day. The children followed Tiju to the canola field, where the water and grass were abundant, producing various organic crops. But Quihua's family was usually too lazy to clear land for farming, so if they weren't eating grass, they were gnawing on pumpkins. The children played and laughed nearby as Taiju carefully picked nettle leaves into a bamboo basket. These nettle leaves contain a mild toxin, and they need to be thoroughly cooked before they can be eaten. In the local area, nettle leaves are considered a main dish, comparable to the status of cabbage in our country. When Tiju was young, he often cooked nettle leaves with tofu, and the flavor was incredibly fragrant. But after growing up, he hadn't had it again. In less than half an hour, a large basket of nettle leaves was picked. The children, cheerful and carefree, followed closely behind, reminding Tiju of the happy childhood days that had passed and would never return. Quihua's family isn't considered too poor. Their house, a two-story villa, is located halfway up the mountain. After returning home, Tiju started the fire, while the children sat or stood behind him, playing and laughing. Tiju reheated the leftover rice from yesterday. Since there's no electricity here, no induction stove or rice cooker, he had to keep stirring to prevent the rice from burning. Quihua is not at home, and the children are truly in a pitiful situation. Taiju had no choice but to cook a big pot of nettle leaves as the main dish for today. Quihua's house is located high in the mountains, far from roads, and it's difficult to gather manpower. Even though it's the 21st century, there's still no electricity. All cooking relies on this family heirloom stove. Seizing the moment when the fire was blazing, Tiju set up the blackened iron pot and took a few grains of coarse salt from a nearby bag, tossing them into the pot. As he cooked, he also had to supervise the children doing their homework. The place where the children do their homework is extremely basic. When the house was initially designed, they forgot to include windows, so even in broad daylight, it's still dark inside. Quihua couldn't bear to buy desks and chairs for the children, so they could only lay their books on the ground and lie down to write and draw. What a miserable situation. Finally, the water boiled, and Tiju tossed the nettle leaves into the pot. The nettle leaves didn't need to be washed after being picked because the morning dew had already rinsed them, just like how Quihua barely ever bathes. Even if they accidentally fell into the fire, it didn't matter. He would simply pick them up and throw them into the pot because in Quihua's house, the saying, "a little dirt never hurt," is an absolute truth. A large pot of nettle leaves may seem like a lot, but once cooked, there isn't much left. Normally, the children eat as much as adults, so this pot is barely enough to half fill them. After adding the nettle leaves, Tiju tossed the bamboo basket aside and picked up a dusty spatula from the ground, vigorously pressing and stirring the contents of the pot. Then he took a bowl of flour from the dusty cabinet behind him. Flour is the soul of nettle porridge here. Without it, the dish would be bitter and hard to swallow. The flour also adds thickness to the nettle porridge. The children find everything delicious because there's no room to be picky. Being picky means going hungry. They only eat one meal a day. Quihua is not at home, so the children have no choice but to eat grass. Taiju cooked while supervising the children doing their homework. The children lay diligently on the ground, writing carefully, while Tiju watched them intently. In truth, Tiju is illiterate because his family was so poor when he was young that they couldn't afford to send him to school, leaving him unable to read or write even at the age of 30. In Nepal, the illiteracy rate is very high, and going to school is a luxury only for the wealthy. That's why Tiju hopes his children can become successful, yearning for one of them to go to university. The children lay on the ground, using the photographer's light to do their homework. The ground was covered with only a shabby old blanket. Before long, Tiju lifted the steaming lid and picked up a stick from the ground to stir the pot. The burning fire and swirling dust filled the room with smoke. The pots and bowls scattered across the floor were in disarray, and the items on the walls were placed haphazardly, clearly reflecting Quihua's lack of interest in tidying up the house. Even if a mouse entered the house, it might need a guide to avoid getting lost. In less than 15 minutes, the nettle porridge was ready. It might look unappetizing, but to the children, it was a rare treat. Taiju served a few spoonfuls of rice onto plates, adding a few ladles of nettle porridge to go with it. A simple and humble dish was thus born. The whole family sat cross-legged to eat. Though there were no tables or chairs, they ate with great relish, their mouths making loud smacking sounds. Their oily hands kneaded the rice and shoved it into their mouths. You might find their way of eating hard to accept, but in Nepal, their habits are similar to those in India. It's true that different places breed different customs. When you're complaining about how tough life is, maybe you should see how they live. Thank you for watching. The next episode will be even more exciting.